Well, welcome to this week's Critical Race Theory Thursday, brought to you from my wonderful office here at Columbia Self-Storage. Today I want to highlight the work of Patricia Williams, who is one of the real founders and early writers in critical race theory and remains an incredibly important author in legal scholarship, but in really theorizing race and the body more generally. On a personal level, Williams was my colleague at Columbia Law School for a number of years. And when she left Columbia to go to Northeastern to teach there in Boston, I inherited her chair. She was the James L. Dorr Professor of Law at Columbia until she left, and then I took over her chair, and it was just an enormous honor and responsibility to carry forward the legacy of her work in the name of the Dorr Professorship. So what I want to talk about today is the way that Williams writes and how it really distinguishes a kind of particular feature of critical race theory. And it is the combination of kind of memoir, theory, storytelling, allegory, and history. And so her 1991 book, The Alchemy of Race and Rights, was game-changing. It is a series of chapters in which she tells stories that involve her own life, anecdotes from her life, the history of her family, and then connects them to an analysis of race, a new set of tools for understanding race and racism in the United States, and does so with beautiful prose. She's just a fantastic writer, which is not something one often sees in legal scholars. This book was so important and made such an incredible impact in the early 1990s that it contributed to the fact that she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, a Genius Grant, shortly after the book came out. I have taught chapters from this book every year that I have taught law, and the book continues to teach me, as does Professor Williams. So the chapter I want to highlight for today is called The Pain of Word Bondage. The Pain of Word Bondage. And what she does in this chapter is she tells a story about an experience she had in Boston with a colleague, another law faculty, another law professor, Peter Gable, who was one of the founders of the critical legal studies movement. Gable had a very profound impact on the formation of a left, largely Marxist or class-based critique of law. And one of the insights of the critical legal studies people was that rights were alienating, that rights had the capacity to separate us from one another. And so the story that Williams tells is of when both Gable and Williams are in Boston looking to rent an apartment as young law professors. Gable expressed to her his real remorse and kind of pain about having to enter into a lease. That the writing of a legal document with someone, let's say you're moving into a triplex and you live above the owner of the house, to enter into that written document really separates you from a relationship with the other person. Your relationship to them is mediated through law, through all of these terms, and we've all signed leases. We know there's all that language in there we don't understand, but that we have to sign, and the other person says, I don't know, I just have to do this, right? And it interrupts our ability to connect person to person. And he described it as being alienating, separating, and ultimately kind of creates this sense of loneliness. And what he longed for was just the shaking of the hand, the looking in the eye and saying, I will be your tenant, I promise to pay the rent, and the landlord makes the promises that landlords make. And Williams says, well, that's nice for you, but as a black woman, I yearn for the formality of rights. I want to have a legal document that mediates our relationship. It's important because, first of all, she says, I want to be recognized as a rights holder, as somebody who can sign a lease and who can, through the practice of paying rent every month and abiding by that lease, be seen as a law-abiding person. You, Peter, as a white person, that is taken for granted. Me, as a black woman, the fact of my having rights and being a rights holder is still kind of up for question. So the formality of a lease is actually something that recognizes my humanity. In her position as a black woman, she actually wants to insist on rights. Reminds me of Hannah Arendt's observation in the end of The Origins of Totalitarianism, is that part of what Jews who were rendered stateless and others who were refugees at the end of World War II longed for was a kind of reciprocal sense of humanity and what she describes as the right to have rights. That's what it is to be human. And that is what Williams is insisting on, is that the landlord, the person with whom she's contracting, recognize her humanity and that she has a right to have rights. And that Gable's refusal to do that, Gable's longing for something apart from rights, ignores the kind of privilege that he has as a white person that someone like Patricia Williams does not have. So I think what this writing raises for me is this very interesting question, which I often used to ask in class over and over, is this problem that we're looking at one that demands more law, more rights, or is this a situation that perhaps demands less law, fewer rights? And for Gable, because of his privilege, he could say, oh, I don't need rights. Rights get in the way of my connections. Whereas for Williams, she says, black people are not seen as fully human in our society. I need rights in order to recognize my humanity and hold my landlord to account. Patricia Williams, The Alchemy of Race and Rights. If you have not read this book, run out and get it right now. Get it in hard copy from a bookstore because bookstores are struggling. But it is phenomenal writing, phenomenal insights, and gives you a window in some of the early ideas of critical race theory that I think continue to have salience and relevance in our society. Take care.